In this video, I'll show you how to create a Legionella Risk Assessment using our app Flow Mobile Surveying. This template that I'm about to show you follows the UK's approved Code of Practice L8 and the HSG274 Part 2. Templates can also be customized, so if you have different data collection or report requirements, let us know and we can easily customize your template to suit. So before I start, I'll explain there's two parts to the software. First of all, there's the dashboard, which you can see here on the left-hand side, and then there's the mobile app, which you can see here on the right-hand side. The two parts of our software work together in real time. So if you're making some changes in the office using the dashboard, those changes will be instantly reflected on the mobile app. And vice versa, you can actually follow along in the office as your ground team is collecting data on site using the app. You can actually follow along and see exactly what they're doing. So this real-time data sync sets us apart from a lot of our competitors. Something to mention here is the app is also designed to work offline. If you are offline, you can continue to carry out your survey without any trouble. Once you get an internet connection, any unsynced data will sync from your device to the back end, and then whoever's in the office can then see what's changed. So if you're following the usual process, you'll create the job in the dashboard as I'm about to show you now. The job is where your report will live. So let's go ahead and create our job. I'm going to tap this button here. Now let's fill in the client, like so. The project reference typically would be your job ID. And then the address is where you're doing the work. So I'm going to imagine we're working for a council. And as I'm typing here, the map should update to show the coordinates, as it has done now. You can also pinpoint this location if you want. Please check out a separate video we have on that. Next is the UPRN. That means unique property reference number. You can leave this blank if it doesn't apply. The pipeline is the type of work that you're doing. So I'm going to select the Legionella Inspections pipeline. The pipeline dictates the stages that the job has to go through before it's considered complete. We'll talk about this more at the end. You can optionally add some tags to help you further categorize the job. Again, we have a separate video on that. But essentially, you want to think about tags as making the search more powerful. So do use that if you want to improve the search facility. Next is the value. This is how much the job is worth to yourself. The value is only visible on the dashboard to office space users. Mobile users won't see this. Next are the notes. So you can write private notes for your team, which will only show on the app and the dashboard. Your client won't get to see these. I'm not going to fill this in, but you might say something like keys and lockbox, something like that, or maybe a telephone number for a client. Next is we must schedule this job. So there are a few ways to do this. You can put in a single date, you can put a date and a time, or you can put the start date and start time and an end date and end time. I'm just going to keep it simple by putting in today's date. Next, we need to assign this to whoever's doing the work. I'm going to assign this to myself, and I'm going to assign this to Amber as well. Now, because I'm logged in as me here, and I've assigned this job to myself, as soon as I hit save, this job should pop up on the right-hand side, and the mobile app essentially becomes my workload for today. Now, the due date is when you expect to get your report to the client, so I'm going to say tomorrow if it's going to take a bit of time to tidy up the report. Now keep an eye on the app on the right hand side. As soon as I hit save, this should sync up automatically, as it has done. So now we have our job on the mobile app. The next step is to create our report. So typically you might want to do this in the office before you leave to site or before your surveyors start their work. This means you can pre-fill some of the report information before they get there. So let's add the report by tapping this button here. I've got a lot of reports here. You just have the ones we give you access to. I'm going to select the Legionella Risk Assessment template. Now you can see as soon as I did that, we now have all of these sections to complete. So the first one you want to do is the scope and site details. Pop in some basic information about the scope of work. So I'm going to say full risk assessment for all buildings. I'll pop in the site type as a council, and I'm going to leave this blank, but I could also put in a site description too. I'm going to hit save, and you can see that section's checked off. Now I might gloss over some of the sections here for the purpose of this demo. We do have separate videos which explain these things in more detail. So if you want to learn more about individual parts of the report, please go check out those videos. The first thing I'm going to put in is the management structure and responsibilities. Now this template uses what we call presets to make the data collection quicker. And this is a good example. So you can see here we have this add preset option. If I select this, so you can see we either have basic roles or we have these basic and additional roles. Now the basic and additional roles you might use for a larger site and the basic roles for a smaller site. So I'm going to select this one here and hit save. Now by using this preset, this has added 4 individual items. We have the duty holder, responsible person, deputy responsible person, and the Legionella control contractor. You can see if I click into one of these, it has filled in some responsibilities. Now you can overwrite this if you think that's appropriate. We can also update the preset to match your language and your expectations so that you're not having to type this each time if you think something different should be in here. You'll notice that the name, email, telephone and address haven't been populated, so let's put those in now. Now I'm not going to fill in the telephone number, but I'm going to hit save, and you can see by saving that the highlighting has been removed. Therefore we know we can move on to the next one. So you would continue on in this way, building up a picture of the management structure and responsibilities. If something doesn't apply, you can click and delete it like so. You can also copy these items as well. So we have a separate video on copying items. It's easier on the mobile app generally, so please check that out if you're interested. Alternatively, you can also add a new item from scratch. Select the role. If it's not in this list, you can select other, pop in the role here, and then fill in the rest of the form. So let's move on to the next section. The next section is the cover page photo. So the cover page photo and the inspection are going to be done on site. So now let's drill into the job on the mobile app. And you can see we have this view here. So any reports will be shown within the job. You can see we've already added one here. You can see we've also got this pipeline. These are the pipeline stages as part of the default Legionella Risk Assessment. So you can customize these too. For example, your process might be a little bit different to this. You might have additional stages for an on-site risk assessment, like a personal risk assessment, or maybe you want to record also the fact you've invoiced this client, so we can add and remove stages to follow your process. Now, the first thing you might want to do on site is to press the Get Directions button. This will open up Google Maps and take you to the site. Alternatively, you can press Copy Address and then paste it into a third-party navigation app. I'm now going to drill into the report and let's see what we've got here. So first of all, you'll see the scope and site details has been ticked, showing that we've completed this part in the office. Let's open this up, and we might want to just check the scope at this point before we start the work. Let's go back, and we can also see the management structure responsibilities has been partially completed, and next is the cover page photo. So let's go in here. I'm going to open this up. Now the first thing you're going to do on site is to take a picture of the building. This is going to form part of your cover page. So let's select an image from our gallery to form the cover page. Now, normally you'd use this top option to open up the native camera on your phone or your tablet. I'm going to select this bottom option to select an image from the gallery instead. See, here's an image of my council building. That looks great. Let's select it and hit save. Now you can see that section's checked off, and let's move on to the next one. So this is where you're going to spend most of your time on the site, the inspection section. We use something called presets to make data collection really rapid. So you can either add inspection items individually using the Add Item button here. Alternatively, you can use the preset to save time. So it tends to be during a Legionella risk assessment, you might find common groupings of items. For example, a commercial kitchen or a kitchenette. In this case, you can use the preset to add lots of items at the same time. So let's say in this example, I found a calorifier set. Let's see what that's going to do. I'm going to select this. I'm going to fill in the building, the level, and the location, like so, and I'm going to hit save. Now you can see this has added 2 items for me. First of all, it's added an asset with the name of Calorifier, and it's also added an expansion vessel. So these are 2 items you might expect to find together. You'll notice as well it's highlighted each item in red, and this red highlighting is telling us there's something to do. So we need to go into this one and complete the missing information about this calorifier. You can give it a unit reference if you like, so that could be something like Cal1. And then we've got a series of questions. These questions are customizable. These are just part of our default template. So is the calorifier accessible for safe inspection? We could say yes. Alternatively, if we had said no, then we're going to be prompted for some recommendations, and it's got an indicative risk level of critical. At the end of this form, you're going to be prompted to put in an overall risk level for this calorifier. But you're going to see these little hints as you go, which are going to suggest what that risk could be. So I'm going to say this one is accessible. The cold water source, we can use the shortcut perhaps to save a bit of time. So these are some names that we've got as part of this template. You could just type whatever you want though if this isn't suitable. Now what is this serving? Again, we have some suggestions here. So you can put in this information as you go. The capacity is in litres, so pop that in here. I'm not going to fill in this form completely, but I'm going to fill in some of the more important parts which have the risk levels. So you can see here we next have a question about the unit integrity. Again, if it's unsatisfactory, you're going to be prompted to put in a recommendation, and also there's an indicative risk level of high. If you were to select the magnifying glass here, it does give you a suggestion, although you can just type in whatever you want. This is just to save time. So I'm going to imagine that the unit integrity of this calorifier is unsatisfactory, and we've popped in a recommendation too. Next is the construction materials. We have some suggestions here. Is the unit isolated? Yes, no, or not applicable? I'm going to say no. However, if the unit was isolated, it would be acting as a dead leg essentially, so there is a risk level associated with that. There is adequate thermal insulation. Again, if we had selected no, we have a risk level associated with that. And I just work my way through this form. As you can see here, I'm not going to fill all of these in. You get the idea. Finally, we have some temperature readings. So we can select the stored temperature in this case, the flow temperature as well. And then we can also put some photographic evidence in. I'm going to select an image of my calorifier from this gallery, like so. Next is we have the drain point, so I'm going to pop that in as well. Now the preset has actually added those labels in, so we didn't have to do it ourselves. And then finally we have the return pump. You could put pictures in for whatever you want. These are just the ones that were part of this preset. So I'm going to give this an overall risk. Now if I scroll back up, if you remember, one of those risks was suggested as high because the unit integrity was unsatisfactory. Therefore we have this little message here. Because there are no other risks currently selected, I'm going to select high as my overall risk. And the justification is due to unsatisfactory unit condition, like so. We can put some additional comments and recommendations here too if we like. I'm going to click save, and you can see that our calorifier has now been input. The image on the right hand side has updated to show one of those thumbnail images, and the red highlighting has disappeared. So whenever you use the preset, each item will be individually highlighted, and that tells us that there's something to do. In this case, you need to go in, complete the missing information, and hit save. As soon as you've done that, the highlighting disappears, and you know you can move on to the next one. So let's do the same exercise with the expansion vessel. You can see the assets being pre-selected, as well as the asset type. We could give this a unit reference. I'm going to say EXP1 for this. This is accessible. I'm not going to fill in all of this form, but I'm going to show you that there are different options here. So you can see we have similar questions as before around the unit integrity and condition, and the orientation, and so on. But there's not much to this in relation to the calorifier. So there are far fewer questions. I'm going to say this was fine, and then we'll take a photograph. So let's select a photograph from the gallery. Remember, like I said before, you will be using the camera to take a photograph rather than selecting an image from the gallery generally. I'm just doing this because I'm using a simulator. Finally, when you get to the bottom, you can select the risk. I'm going to say it's low risk and hit save. So you just continue on in this way, building up the Legionella Risk Assessment as you go. There are some really helpful shortcuts that you can use too. So for example, if I'm still in the storage room and I found something else, I can use the Add Item Here shortcut to quickly populate the building, level and the location. Then we're prompted for the item in the system details. This is broken down into Asset, Outlet, Deadleg and Deadend. If you select Asset, you're going to be prompted for the asset type. You can see we have this list here along with Other Asset if there's something that's not in this list. If you select Other Asset, you must specify the Other Asset type. Similarly for Outlet, if I select Outlet, we have a list of the common outlets, and you can select Other Outlet if there's something that you might not find so often, or you can just type in whatever you wish. Now it's unlikely you're going to want to add every single outlet. Instead, what you can do is you can use the quantity field. So if you were in a room and there were 10 outlets which were basically the same, you could log those together, and then maybe there's one outlet which has some different temperature or different behaviors or features, then you could log that one individually. If you scroll down to the bottom of the form, there's also the option to take the temperature readings and then say whether this is a sentinel outlet. So you can say nearest hot, nearest cold, furthest hot and furthest cold. And then finally we have a risk, and we also have this option user's typical photo for this outlet. So rather than include photos for every single outlet you see, you could include a single photo as a representative sample for say a shower or a tap or something like that. Now let's look at deadlegs. For the deadlegs, you are prompted for the unit reference, cold water and hot water source. We have some checks around the physical unit itself, including the estimated length of unused pipe, which has some suggestions here, and then some photographic evidence. Deadend is pretty much the same. You can see we have the same things here, and you can put in that photograph as well if you want to. So you just continue on in this way on the site, collecting data about the assets and the outlets that you see. Remember, there are some shortcuts you can use. We have the Add Preset option, which I showed you initially, and you can also use Add Item Here to quickly add assets or outlets, deadlegs or dead ends within a specific location. Once you finish the inspection, you can go back up to this page and mark the site work as complete. Now let's head back over to the dashboard and I'll show you some of the other sections. First of all, let's just have a look at that information we gathered on site. So we've got 2 assets here currently, and you'll notice there's this drop down here. Currently it's showing all data. You could group this up though. For example, I could say show me just the infrequently used outlets or the isolated units, for example, or I could group them by cold or hot water source. So there are different options here depending on the task that you're doing. They're going to make your quality control a lot simpler. If I was to group up the assets by type, then you'll see we have a single calorifier and a single expansion vessel. Now this is a very small survey, we haven't actually done that much, but you can imagine this might run on into lots of items. So the next section is the variations to scope section, and this is, for example, if you couldn't access a room, or maybe there's part of the building that just wasn't able to be accessed during the survey, then this was something that would fall outside of the scope that was agreed with the client, in which case you put something in here. Next is the written scheme of control. This is a series of yes/no questions which you can answer rapidly, like so. You can see they're grouped up with some labels and they have some explanations underneath. So this is just a case of answering these, and then we've got some additional questions at the end if you want to include them. So if there are some additional questions, select this and you can just type in your own. We have control 1, 2 and 3. We can also add some additional ones in if you want. Finally, hit save and that section will be completed. The next section is the monitoring control review. So again, we use presets here to save you some time. If I tap this button here, you'll see we have 28 domestic water controls. I'm going to select this and hit save, and you can see it will put these in individually. Once that's completed, you can see each item is highlighted in red, telling us that we must go through, similar to how I showed you on the app before, and we must answer these questions. Some of these things might not be relevant, so you can also mark them as not applicable. I'm going to click on this first one. I can say whether this is applicable or not applicable. If the control is applicable, we're prompted, is there evidence to show whether this has been complete? If I say yes, I'm not prompted for anything else. If I say no, I'm not prompted. But if I say partially, I can say which parts are being done and which parts aren't being done. As soon as I hit save, the highlighting disappears to let me know that that one is complete, and we can move on to the next one. You'll notice because we use the preset that things like the frequency have been put in automatically, although you can change these using the drop down. So the next section is the general risks and recommendations. This is for any risks and recommendations that maybe aren't related to a specific item. So it's risks and recommendations that are at a kind of higher level, I suppose. I can click on this button and use the preset to add some general checks. And it's going to include things like the Legionella logbook and its accuracy, other things that you're going to be checking during the course of your Legionella Risk Assessment. Also for things like deadlegs, we don't include the individual risks, it's done at the top level, so you just say there are some deadlegs on site, therefore there is an overall risk for deadlegs. You can see again each item has been highlighted in red, telling us there's something to do. So I'm going to click on this first one, and first of all you can see we have this question, is it compliant or non-compliant? So I'll say this one is compliant and hit save. Again, this one here is prompting us, is it compliant or non-compliant? So it's just a case of going through each question and answering these like so. You can also view the data in different ways. So I could say, show me all the non-compliance which are missing recommendations. Currently there are none. However, if we had gone into here and marked one of these as non-compliant, but we didn't have a recommendation here, then this would show in that list. So you can use these filters to identify any missing information that might be required. Once you finish that, you have the option to upload some schematics and some other attachments if you need some other supporting evidence. Next, we have the overall risk. So this is optional. You don't have to include an overall risk on the report, although a lot of surveyors like to do this. If you don't include the overall risk, you'll still have the specific item risks and the general risks, but you're not giving the overall report a single risk to kind of sum it up. So if you select include overall risk on report, you have the option to fill in these different things. You can also choose to include the inherent and the controlled risk. I'm not going to fill those in now, but you get the idea. Next is the risk action timeframes. So if you specified a risk, for example, critical, how long are you giving your client to fix this issue? Now we have some suggestions here. For example, you could choose the default general timeframes. So the critical risk is as soon as reasonably practical. If I was to select the default timeframes which are more specific, then you can see we have 3 months, 6 months, and when appropriate. But you can just type in whatever you want here. For example, I could say 1 week, and that's absolutely fine. As soon as I hit save, those will then be associated with those risks on the report. Finally, we have our executive summary, which outlines things like the site occupants, the population at risk, and so on, and also any previous positive Legionella results. This also prompts you to put in the recommended review date, which is when the next risk assessment should be carried out. And then finally, we have a sign-off. You can have as many sign-offs as you want. We have some preset suggestions. So for example, there's a 3-stage sign-off with the account manager and a 3-stage sign-off with senior management. I'm going to select this one. As soon as I hit save, 3 sign-offs are added. First of all, you have the quality control sign-off. So I'm going to say it was myself who signed this off. We can put a signature and a date in here too and hit save. Now you'd repeat the same process for the other sign-offs. So now that you've input all of the data, what about the report? How do we look at the report? Well, what you need to do is to select what we call a layout from the drop-down. You might have different layouts for different types of survey, for example, healthcare, non-healthcare, that kind of thing. Or you might have different layouts for different clients' requirements. I'm just going to select this one, which is the only one on this current template that I've got. And I'm going to hit View Report. So this has now shown me a live preview of the report. And it's telling me the report isn't ready because there are some errors we need to resolve. There's our cover page image, which has been pulled through from the app when we first took that photo in the cover page section. Then we can see the type of survey. This is a Legionella Risk Assessment. We also have some information about the client, the site address, and so on. Now, if you become one of our clients, we also offer a free cover page design service. So you'd end up with a cover page which looks a bit more like this. Now, we operate in lots of different areas, not just Legionella, but you can see some of the ones that we've created for our clients here. Now, let's go back to this default cover page. The next section you can see is telling us the report isn't ready. There's some errors we need to resolve. Now, you'll work your way through these issues, and as you do so, these errors will disappear from the report. But essentially, this means you don't accidentally issue a report to a client if there are any issues, because it's going to be very obvious that there are. The next section has been mostly populated from the job when we first set that up. And you can see we have this building that's been identified when we put in the address. Next is we have a table of contents, which is going to grow and shrink depending on what you've got in the report. I'm actually going to skip to a more populated report just shortly. I just want to show you this one that we've been building up. Next is the sign-off. Now, we haven't completed these sections, but you can see we have the sign-off that we added for Paul King, and then there's 2 sign-offs awaiting details here. Now, this report looks fairly incomplete because we haven't added a lot of the information, but you get a general idea of the shape of things. We like to show the risks front and center, so you can see we have this risk breakdown, and it's broken into specific item risks and general top-level risks. You can see these columns represent the severity, critical, high, moderate, and low, and then the total risks is the combination of both of these summed together. Below you can see we have our risks and recommendations. These are the specific item recommendations, ordered from most severe to least severe. And then the general risks and recommendations is the more top level recommendations. You'll notice these ones have a view link where you can click on it and it'll take you straight to that item. So for a calorifier, we have these questions which are all grouped up together. And then you can see the overall risk and the justification. Along with the time frame, we said that a critical risk must be resolved in 1 week, so it's shown here. Now this layout will change depending on how many photographs you have. Because we have 3, they're shown side by side, whereas the expansion vessel just had 1, and that shows on the left hand side with the comments and recommended actions on the right hand side. Now we don't have any outlet temperatures or anything yet. I'm going to skip over to a more populated report just in a second. So let's go back to here. Now let's scroll down. You can see we have some basic boilerplate information on the report, along with that management compliance review where we answered those yes/no questions. We have our management structure and responsibilities. Clearly some of these still need to be complete, which we haven't done yet. Our monitoring control review, we just added the circulation pumps if you remember, but you can see that's meant to be done weekly and this hasn't been evidenced. Next, we have the system overview. This is everything that you found within the report. So all of your assets, all of your outlets, all grouped together. And as part of the executive summary, we also show the infrequently used outlets, dead legs and dead ends. Next is the detailed inspection findings. This is what I was showing you before, and it's more in-depth information about a particular asset. And you can see here we just have 2. One was the calorifier and one was this expansion vessel. The outlet temperature record isn't completed, but we'll show you one in a second. And then the appendices has some basic information about Legionella inspections, along with those time frames that we put in. And you can see here we have our maintenance checklist, which someone could check out as well. Also, at the very end of the report, we have our risk justifications. So when I showed you on the inspection section, when I clicked on some of those things like unit condition, and we said it was unsatisfactory, we do suggest a risk. And that's based on these justifications in the standard. So check those out if you're interested. Now here I've loaded a more complete report. You can see it's got a slightly different cover image. I'm going to scroll down and show you some of the things we have here. First of all, you can see the signatures. We've filled these sections in too. In this one we've included an overall risk. On the last one we hadn't. If you do include an overall risk, this is how it will be displayed. So you're kind of summing up this Legionella Risk Assessment as a whole. This one has some more risks in the critical, high, moderate and low sections, and some items that were inaccessible for servicing, which we'll show here. Next is, you can see this is looking a bit more complete. The specific risks and recommendations will bullet point any recommendations like so. So if there are multiple recommendations, you're going to see them right here. Scrolling ahead, you can see the general risks and recommendations are a bit more complete, and this is broken up into compliant and non-compliant. Next is the introduction, like we saw before, the management compliance review, and also the management structure and responsibilities. Next is the management control review. You can see this one has a lot more information because we've gone ahead and completed those various questions. So you can see from left to right, it's going from the most frequent to the least frequent. Any partially evidenced actions will show in yellow. And if you click the view button, it'll take you to this page where you can see the parts that have been completed and the parts that haven't been completed. Next is, you can see this system overview is looking a bit more complete. We have 4 asset types and 5 outlet types. Next is the infrequently used outlets. So this is how they will be displayed. You can see we have this image along with the outlet type and unit reference and the reason for infrequent use, which might be known or not known. Next is the deadlegs. So you can see here we have this single deadleg. I should just point out that because I'm logged in as a super admin, then I get this message, nothing to show. You're not going to see that. Just want to mention that. So next we have the dead end section. There are none on this report, and we have a summary of the site schematics, of which there are 1. Next we have the detailed inspection findings, and it's like before, we have this calorifier, we have the quantity of 1 shown here as well. Any temperatures that are outside the expected or desired range rather will be shown in red. So you can see this return temperature is showing in red because it's 10 degrees. So next we have this electric water heater, an instantaneous water heater, and a thermostatic mixing tab. So we've completed the asset section. Now we're onto the outlets. Rather than showing the outlets individually, we show them in this table. So you can see we have the outlets listed by building level location, along with the quantity and some information about the temperatures and some important features. Again, any readings that are out of the desired range will be shown in red like so. Lastly, we have these appendices, and because we've ticked some of those typical outlet checkboxes, we have those shown here. So once you're happy with your report, the last thing to do is to download the PDF. This is what you send to your clients. So the downloaded PDF will have some changes. Everything we've been looking at so far has been a preview, and so the downloaded PDF is the sort of finished article. So here's our downloaded PDF. You'll notice that we have the page breaks. We've got the headers here, which we didn't have before. And we've also got the footers, which includes the project ID. Every page now has its own page number. And you'll notice before on areas like the table of contents, the view button has now changed to a page number. So if you did download this and print it off, or rather if your client did, then they would know exactly which page they need to riffle through to find the information they need. So let's just jump to one of those sections now. I'm going to jump to the detailed inspection findings section. One more thing that I'd like to show you is around the images. If I want to, I can click on these images and it'll take me to the full high-res image. I guess this one wasn't that high resolution, but if it was, I could zoom in and get all that extra detail if I want to. Now finally, I'd like to show you some of the back office features. I'm going to go through this really quickly. So I'm going to jump back up to this section here, and we're going to take a look at the jobs list. Now the jobs list we didn't talk too much about at the start, but this is essentially all of the jobs you currently have on the go. It's going to be made up of lots of different job types. To show just the Legionella risk assessments, select Legionella inspections from the drop-down. You can see we just have 2 incomplete jobs, and that's 2 jobs that we have overall. You can filter this in lots of different ways. So I could say, show me all the jobs which are awaiting site work. In other words, where that first stage hasn't been completed. If I now say waiting QC, the first stage has been completed and the next ones haven't. So this is showing a different job. Now you can search this job list using the search field. You can also search by tags as well, which I mentioned earlier. There's lots you can do with this, so please check out our knowledge base if you want to learn more. Another really important feature for Legionella risk assessments is the ability to copy old reports. If you're going back to the same site time and time again, you can copy an old report to save yourself time. So for example, if I want to copy this one, I could go into this job, into this report, copy this report to my clipboard. I then create a new job for the reinspection. Let's imagine it's this one here. I could then open up this clipboard and say copy here. I'm then prompted for what I want to copy over. So I could say all fields and confirm. When you do the copy, it doesn't copy the photos by default because we expect you're going to want to take some new ones, although you can override that and actually choose to copy the photographs as well. When you copy a report, you leave the old report untouched. You're essentially just changing the cloned report, which is far safer. And because a lot of that information from the site has been pre-populated, you're not having to enter it from scratch. So for example, if I go into the inspection section, I've got these 2 items that I surveyed the first time. I can go into each one and just update the bits that I need, for example, the temperatures. When I do that copy, I might only choose to copy over certain things, like the building, the level, location, the asset type, for example, and the rest I'm going to leave to myself to do later on. So that brings us to the end of this demo. There's lots more to learn if you're interested, but I think that gives you the basics. If you are interested in using this for your business, please get in touch and we'll be happy to set you up with a test account so you can have a little play around for yourself. All the best. Bye bye.